She entered the room quietly, carrying a small backpack and a worn-out notebook. The music classroom was bright, full of polished instruments and the soft hum of students tuning violins or adjusting sheet music. No one noticed her at first. She walked slowly to the back row and took the seat closest to the wall, her eyes down, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater. The teacher, busy arranging books on his desk, glanced at her for a brief moment, then looked away. To him, she was just another new student, nothing special. No introduction, no questions. She didn't even make eye contact. He marked her name on the attendance sheet without a second thought. As the class began, students started talking and laughing, sharing stories about performances and competitions. Some bragged about how hard their pieces were. A few even played small parts on the piano in the corner, showing off their skills. The girl said nothing. She just listened. Her eyes followed the piano, but her body remained still. One of the students, a loud boy with fancy shoes, leaned over to his friend and whispered, "Who's the new girl?" She looked scared. They laughed. She heard it, but didn't respond. She had gotten used to these comments a long time ago. The teacher clapped his hands for silence. "All right, everyone, let's start. Today we begin working on a new piece. Challenging, but I believe each of you can handle it." He walked to the whiteboard and wrote down the name of the composition. It was a difficult one, usually played by students far more experienced. The room filled with whispers and groans. Even the confident ones looked unsure. The girl's eyes widened slightly when she saw the name. It was a piece she knew well, one she had heard many times as a child. She didn't show any emotion. She sat still, listening as the teacher explained the timing, the tempo, the emotion behind the notes. As the teacher handed out the printed music sheets he gave her, one without even making eye contact. "You'll try it too," he said quickly. She nodded once. That was enough. At the end of class, some students gathered around the piano, trying to play a few lines from the sheet. Most of them stumbled through it. The girl stayed in her seat, quietly watching their fingers move. On her way out, one of the other students stopped her. "Hey, are you sure you're in the right class?" he asked, half joking, half curious. She gave a small nod and walked past him. Outside, the wind blew gently as she walked down the long street to her small apartment. The city was loud and full of distractions, but her world stayed quiet. She didn't wear headphones. She didn't check her phone. She simply walked, step by step, as if she were following a beat only she could hear. At home, she placed the sheet music carefully on the table, looked at it for a long time. Her fingers gently traced the notes, not playing, yet just remembering. Her eyes closed, and for a moment, she could hear the tune in her mind, soft, deep, beautiful. There was an old keyboard under her bed, untouched for months. She pulled it out and plugged it in. The keys were dusty, but still worked. She sat. Dawn placed her fingers on the keys and played the first 3 notes. Then she stopped. She wasn't ready yet, not because she couldn't do it, but because something inside her was still healing. She hadn't played in front of people for years. She hadn't told anyone what music really meant to her. But something about this class, this piece, in this moment, told her it was time to start again. She looked at the keyboard, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "Just one more try." The next day, the teacher walked into class with a serious face. He didn't greet anyone like he usually did. He simply walked to the piano, sat down, and began playing a small part of the new piece they were all supposed to learn. His fingers moved carefully, hitting each note with clear purpose. When he finished, he looked around the room and said, "Now you try." A few confident students stepped up first. One played fast, but missed several notes. Another tried to show off, but lost the rhythm halfway through. The teacher didn't say much, just wrote comments on his clipboard and called the next name. It was clear he expected more from them. This wasn't an easy piece, and he wanted everyone to take it seriously. Then, the quiet girl's name was called. The room fell, a bit silent. Some students turned to look at her. Others looked away, expecting her to say she couldn't do it. She stood up slowly, not rushing, and walked to the piano. The teacher didn't smile or offer help. He simply nodded and said, "Just try." She sat on the bench, adjusted the seat slightly, and placed her hands above the keys. Her fingers hovered there for a moment, but she didn't start. The room felt tense. A few students exchanged glances. One of them whispered, "She's going to mess up. Watch." She pressed one key, then another. But then, after just 3 soft notes, she stopped. "I'm not ready," she said quietly, not looking up. The teacher raised an eyebrow. "You had the same time as everyone else," he said firmly. "Can't skip your turn just because you're nervous." She nodded slightly and returned to her seat. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She just accepted what he said and sat down again. Some students rolled their eyes. Others chuckled under their breath. One boy shook his head and said, "Told." You, the teacher, sighed. "This piece will not play itself," he said. "If you don't push yourselves, you won't grow." He looked directly at the girl for a second. Especially those of you who think you can hide in the back and stay quiet. She didn't react. She simply opened her notebook and looked. Down, eyes calm, face unreadable. After class, the teacher stopped her at the door. His tone wasn't unkind, but it was firm. "You'll need to be ready by next week. No excuses. Everyone plays." She nodded again softly. Yes. When she got home, she didn't take off her coat right away. She walked straight to the small keyboard and sat in front of it. She opened the music sheet and placed it in front of her. She stared at the notes, reading them like an old friend's handwriting. She began playing slowly. Her fingers remembered, even if her heart still hesitated. She didn't need to look at the sheet most of the time. Music was already inside. She made mistakes, but she didn't stop. She corrected them gently, patiently. Every hour she played, her movements became smoother. Her sound became stronger. She didn't just practice to impress. The class, she was searching for something. Within the music, something she had once lost. By midnight, her fingers were tired, but her eyes were brighter. She closed the keyboard and whispered to herself, "Next week, ... I'll be ready." Outside, the city lights flickered through the window, but she didn't. Notice her mind was full of music. The sound of that piano piece, once so far away, was now returning. And this time, she wasn't going to hide from it. By the middle of the week, word had already spread in class. She didn't even try, someone said. "Maybe she's scared of the piano," another laughed. It didn't matter whether they said it quietly or not. She heard it all. At break time, a group of students sat around a small table, joking about who would fail next. One of them leaned forward and asked, "Do you think she can even read sheet music?" Another replied, "She probably joined the wrong class. I bet she thought this was beginner piano." Every time she passed by, the room seemed to grow quieter. For a moment, like people were watching her, but pretending not to. No one offered to talk to her. No one asked how she was doing. She didn't complain. She kept to herself, stayed calm, and stayed silent. But inside, she felt the pressure growing. That night, she returned to her small apartment. She didn't eat right away. She placed her bag on the chair, pulled out the sheet music, and walked to her keyboard. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the fridge. She sat down, placed her hands over the keys, and closed her eyes. The first few notes came out gently, like a whisper. She had played this piece so many times as a child. Back then, her grandfather would sit beside her, correcting her posture, guiding her rhythm. He never raised his voice. He only smiled and tapped her wrist lightly when she rushed the tempo. The memory of those moments came back to her now, not with pain but warmth. She played the first page, then the second. By the third, her fingers moved freely, without effort. The piece was difficult, yes, but it was already inside her. She had just locked it away for too long. Back at school, the teacher had assigned each student a time slot to perform the piece in front of the class next week. He reminded them every day, "Come prepared. This will show me how much you want to grow." When he looked at her, he said nothing. He simply moved on to the next name. Even he wasn't sure if she would follow through. Some students were practicing. Together, after class, they asked each other for help, shared tips, and laughed over wrong notes. No one invited her. She stayed behind just a little longer, watching them from a distance. One afternoon, while she was packing up her notebook, a girl from the group passed by her desk and whispered, "Good luck next week. You'll need it." The girl didn't respond. Something in her chest tightened. She had never asked for their attention. All she wanted was a chance to play, a chance to prove, maybe not to them, but to herself, that she still belonged. With music later that night, as she played alone again, she began recording herself with her old phone. She listened carefully to her mistakes, stopping and adjusting with every small error. She wasn't just practicing now, she was preparing. Her focus was deep. Her determination had returned. At one point she played the full piece from beginning to end. No pauses, no hesitation. When the last note echoed through the small room, she sat still, hands resting in her lap. A small smile touched her lips. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud, not because anyone saw her, but because she knew what she had just done. She looked at the calendar. Just 3 days left until performance day. And this time, she wasn't going to freeze. She was going to play. The day before the performance, the classroom was noisier than usual. Everyone was nervous, even the confident ones. Some were practicing in corners, fingers dancing over imaginary keys. Others were flipping through their sheet music again and again, mumbling notes under their breath. She sat at her usual spot. Quiet, calm. She had her notebook open, but she wasn't reading it. Her eyes were fixed on the piano at the front of the room. She wasn't scared anymore. She had spent hours every night preparing. She knew the piece like her own breath. Still, no one noticed her. When the teacher entered, the room quickly went silent. He held a clipboard and looked serious. "Tomorrow," he said, "each of you will perform the assigned piece. No shortcuts, no excuses. Be ready." He began calling names, assigning order for the performances. When he called hers, he paused for a second. "You'll go near the end," he said. "That should give you time too. Gather yourself." Some students smirked. A few whispered under their breath again. One boy leaned to another and said, "They should have just skipped her. What a waste of time." She heard it. This time, she looked up, just for a second, but she said nothing. After class, as others were leaving in groups or pairs, laughing and chatting, she stayed behind. She stood near the piano for a moment, just looking at it. The teacher was packing up his things. He noticed her, but didn't say anything at first. She stepped closer and asked softly, "Can I practice on the real piano for a few minutes?" He looked surprised. Maybe he didn't expect her to speak. Maybe he thought she was giving up. But he nodded. 5 minutes. And I have to lock the room." She sat on the bench, placed her fingers gently on the keys, and began to play. Only a few notes, nothing full. But even those few seconds were smooth, clear, and perfectly timed. The teacher turned around slowly, as if he hadn't quite heard it right. He watched her hands. They moved with purpose, with control. He didn't interrupt, just stood there. Quietly observing, she stopped after one short section and stood up. "Thank you," she said simply, then left the room. The teacher didn't say a word. He stared at the piano long after she had gone. That night at home, she didn't practice for long. She had already done the work. Her hands were steady. Her heart was ready. Instead, she took out an old photo from under her pillow. It was a small picture, creased and fading. In it, she sat beside her grandfather at a piano bench. He had one hand on her shoulder and the other pointing to the keys. She smiled softly at the memory. "I'll play for you tomorrow," she whispered, "no matter who's watching." In the morning, she packed lightly, just her sheet music, her notebook, and the same quiet strength she had always carried inside her. Outside, the sky was cloudy. There was a soft chill in the air, but she didn't feel cold. She walked to school with calm steps, each one steady, each one closer to the moment she had been waiting for. The day of the performance had arrived. And even though many still didn't believe in her, she believed in herself now. And that was enough. The classroom felt different that morning. The piano had been polished. Chairs were lined up neatly, all facing the front. One by one, the students came in, dressed better than usual, holding their music sheets tightly. Some were nervous, some were excited, but all of them knew this was an important day. The teacher stood near the piano, clipboard in hand. His face was serious. "This is not a concert," he said, "but treat it like one. Play with heart. That's what music is for." First student stepped up and began to play. The others watched quietly. There were a few mistakes, a few shaky moments, but overall it was decent. The teacher nodded slightly and wrote something down. The next student followed, then another. Each one played the same piece, some faster, some slower. A few showed off, hitting the keys loudly to impress. One even flipped his hair before starting, trying to look cool. The room clapped politely after each performance, but the energy stayed flat. Everyone was waiting to see who would really stand out. The girl sat in her usual spot at the back. She didn't tap her foot nervously. She didn't fidget. She just sat still, eyes on the piano, quietly listening to each performance. Her turn was coming closer. When one student missed a big section and had to stop and restart, the others giggled quietly. The teacher didn't. He looked disappointed, but didn't say much, just marked his paper and called the next name. Finally, only 2 students were left. The teacher looked up and said, "All right, your turn." She stood up. For a moment, the room felt strangely quiet. A few students exchanged glances. One girl leaned over to whisper something, but stopped. The air had changed. Maybe it was the way she walked to the piano, slow, calm, without fear. Or maybe it was the look on her face. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't proud either. It was peaceful. She sat down at the piano, adjusted the seat carefully, and placed her hands on the keys. She didn't look at the sheet. She didn't ask any questions. She just took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first few notes floated into the air, soft and smooth. The room went still. The sound was different, clean, full of emotion, full of meaning. Every note had weight. Every pause felt like it belonged there. Her fingers moved like they were born to do this. No rushing, no fear. Just music. The other students stopped fidgeting. Some sat straighter. One leaned forward without realizing it. The teacher didn't even blink. His eyes stayed fixed on her hands. As she moved through the piece, her face remained calm, but something deep could be felt in her expression. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story. A quiet story that no one in the room knew, but all of them could feel. When the final note rang out and slowly faded, no one moved. There was a long silence. Then someone clapped once. Then another. Soon, the room filled with applause. Not loud or forced, just real, honest clapping. A few students looked surprised. A few looked ashamed. But all of them clapped. She stood up quietly, nodded once, and walked back to her seat. The teacher still hadn't spoken. His eyes were on his clipboard, but his pen wasn't moving. Finally, he looked up and said softly, "Thank you." That was all. But that was more than enough. After the performance, something changed. The classroom didn't feel the same anymore. When she walked past students in the hallway, they didn't look away or laugh like before. They watched her quietly, as if trying to understand who she really was. Some students tried to act normal, talking about their own performances and comparing who got more claps. But deep down, they all knew what had happened. Her music had touched something they couldn't explain. It wasn't just skill. It was something deeper. Later that day, one student from the group that used to laugh at her stopped by her desk. He stood there awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck, then said, "That was really something. I didn't know you could play like that." She looked up, gave a small smile, and simply nodded. Another girl, the one who had whispered rude comments earlier, didn't say anything this time. But as she walked by, she gave a quiet glance. Not one of hate, but maybe regret. Even the teacher seemed different. In the next class, he kept looking at her, not in a harsh way like before, but as if trying to understand her all over again. He didn't give her extra praise. He didn't make a big speech. But when he handed back her music sheet, he paused and said quietly, "You should keep playing." Those 4 words meant more to her than she could explain. At home, she took out The same photo of her grandfather again. She held it close and whispered, "I did it." That night she didn't need to practice. She played anyway, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The music flowed naturally. Her fingers moved with ease. She wasn't preparing for anyone this time. She was just enjoying the sound. The next week, the teacher announced that a guest from a nearby music academy would visit the class to watch and listen. He said they were looking for students who showed promise. Some got excited, some nervous. But when he looked at her, there was something different in his eyes. Hope, maybe. She didn't speak much about it. She didn't ask questions or try to impress anyone. But at home, she started polishing her skills again, this time more carefully, more calmly. On the day of the guest visit, the class was tense. Everyone dressed better than usual, even the teacher. The guest was an older man with kind eyes and quiet shoes. He sat near the piano and watched each student play a piece of their choice. One by one, the students tried their best. Some made mistakes, some did well. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano again. Like before, quietly, gently, with no need for attention. She didn't say a word. She just played. This time she chose a different piece, one she had loved since childhood. It wasn't fast. It wasn't flashy. But it was beautiful. Honest. From the heart. When she finished, the room was silent again, just like before. The guest didn't clap. Instead, he stood and walked to the teacher. They spoke in low voices for a few moments.
No?
Then the guest looked back at her. Before leaving, he stopped by her desk and said, "You have something rare. Don't hide it anymore." She didn't know what to say, so she just looked at him and nodded. After he left, the teacher told her quietly, "They want to see you at the academy next week. They think you're ready for more." Her heart beat faster. She didn't expect this. She wasn't sure what to feel. But deep inside, she knew. This was only the beginning. The day she was supposed to visit the academy came quickly. She stood in front of the mirror that morning, tying her hair back slowly. She wasn't wearing anything fancy, just her usual clothes, clean and simple. But her eyes looked different now, stronger, braver. She took one last look at the old photo of her grandfather before putting it back in her bag. She wanted it with her, just in case she needed a reminder of why she started playing in the first place. When she reached the academy, the building felt huge. The walls were tall, the halls quiet, and the sound of soft piano music echoed from some distant room. She walked slowly, holding her papers in one hand and her nerves in the other. Everything felt so serious, so real. A woman at the front desk gave her a kind smile and told her where to wait. There were a few other students too, sitting on a bench. Outside the audition room, some looked nervous. Others tried to act calm. She sat quietly, her hands resting on her lap. After a while, someone called her name. She stood up, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The room wasn't too big. There was a grand piano in the center, shining under the lights. Two people sat behind a long table, watching her kindly but without saying much. "Whenever you're ready," one of them said. She nodded once and walked to the piano. She adjusted the seat, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she played. The sound filled the room gently, like water flowing over smooth stones. Her fingers didn't rush. She gave every note the space to breathe. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. She was just telling her story. Every part of the piece carried her feelings, her quiet struggles, her lonely nights, her memories of her grandfather, and the moment she almost gave up. It was all inside the music. And it was beautiful. When she finished, she didn't look up right away. She sat for a moment, letting the final note settle in the air. Then she stood. The two judges looked at each other. One of them smiled gently and said, "Thank you. That was it." No long speech, no loud reaction. Something in their eyes told her that they had felt it too. She walked out of the room quietly. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just breathed deeply and sat down on the bench again. Later that week, she received a letter in the mail. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. She had been accepted into the advanced music program at the academy. She held the letter close to her chest for a long time. No words came out. It's just a quiet, deep breath and a soft smile. At school, the other students heard the news. Some congratulated her quietly. Some didn't know what to say. Even the ones who once laughed at her now looked at her with respect. The teacher, who once doubted her, simply nodded when she entered the classroom and said, "You've earned it." She continued to play, but now with more confidence. She joined new programs, met other musicians, and even began helping a few students who were struggling, just like she once had. But she never forgot how it all started. A quiet girl, a dusty keyboard, a painful memory, and a single chance to play. She didn't become famous overnight. She didn't need to. What mattered most was that she found herself again through music, through belief, and through silence broken by a single, perfect song. And now, she would never stop playing.